Alright. Okay, so yesterday we learned about struct, methods, and code organization. We learned about code organization using modules. We learned how to create our own custom data types using struct and adding behaviors to those structs using methods. So we are using the implementation to add behaviors to those structs. And we also spoke about how to use self when we're using the implementation. And we had a few examples on how to use struct. Then we went to how to update struct. Remember, you have to make it mutable. Mutable, you'll be able to change values. And here we spoke about implementation. For example.
Sorry, Ben, you're a bit muffled there.
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, thank you. So we spoke about modules as well. But you have to understand modules are more useful when you have a giant file of codes. But if you have a small code like 100 lines, you don't really have to use modules. And you also have to remember to define it as public. If you want functions outside the module to be called in the main function. So you have to specify that all these are the struct is public, and even the properties are public before you can be able to call them. And to be able to use functions from a module, then you have to use the keyword use and the name of the module and what you want to use from the implementation that you want to use from the module. And what else we learned? So here, this is where we stopped yesterday. So we're going to, let me first open my, let me erase all this. Okay, so today we're going to learn how to use a safer struct pattern. Back in some of the classes that we did before, I showed you how to deal with error messages. And when you deal with error messages and you're using the ERR and OK, then in your function, you have to return what you're going to be returning. So it's going to be a string or an integer and a string or a string and a string and so on and so forth. But here, since we're dealing with objects, then you're going to be returning an object if there's no errors, but a string if there's an error. So the string is just going to be the error message. So I'm going to show you how it works. Let me share this. Let me present something else. Okay, so let me show you how we deal with that. Okay, so here let me show you how to implement a safer struct pattern, making sure that we're dealing with the error messages. So you're gonna quickly create a struct, employee struct, and we have the ID. We have the ID, which is a uint u32. We have a name, which is a string. Okay, we don't need more than that. Or maybe let's just add the salary. Okay, salary. Okay, so far we know we have everything we need here. So you have an employee struct, but then let's say we want to make sure that when I add a struct. There is no, when I add a struct with values, if I add values to the struct, like for example, the ID, the name, and salary. So what if salary is missing? What if I put salary? The salary is missing. Or what if the salary is a negative number? What if the ID is not valid? It's an invalid ID. So how do I deal with that? So that's how you work with error messages. So it's the same way I showed you before, but in this case, we're not dealing with a variable like a string. We're dealing with an object. And in this case, the employee object. And that is what we're going to be returning when we create an employee. And we also, it's either we're going to return an employee if it's successful, or we're going to return an error message if it's not successful. So let's quickly write the implementation of the struct. And remember, you have to put the same name. So you didn't pay employee. So now let's create a function that's going to add a new employee in the struct. So new, we're going to be adding the ID, which is the U32. We'll enter the name, which is a string, and we're entering the salary, which is a floating point, F64. Okay, so far, so good. So we entering this function is just gonna enter the name of all the values of a certain employee. So we're going to have an error message. Let's say, okay, we deal with name, for example. If the name is empty, there must be an error message. Or if the salary is empty, there's got to be an error message. Or if a salary is less than 0, it's negative, then there's going to be an error message. So let's deal with that one by one. So you want to deal if the name is empty. So we will say it will be as simply like if you just use logic, you'll say if name is equal to 0, something like that. But here we're dealing with a string. We're not dealing with a number. So we cannot say if name is equal to 0. So you have to work with a method that deals with string. So in this case, we use this method is empty. So this basically check is true, will automatically be true if there's nothing in it. If the name is empty, then it's going to be true. And if it's not empty, it's false. I hope that makes sense. So this is you dealing with strings. You cannot use the uint, for example, like the ID is empty. It's not gonna work. So here you're dealing with strings. And so if this string is empty, of course, we need to have an error message. It makes sense, right? We need an error message that tells us that the name cannot be empty. So simple as that. Name cannot be empty. It is what's going to be returned. And remember, we're not putting a comma here because we're going to be returning this. So there's no need to put commas. So, and then we've dealt with the first error. Okay, moving on. The second error, we want to check if the salary is less than 0. So if it's less than 0, it's going to be an error. So else if salary is less than 0, then this is another error message. I hope it makes logical sense. And here we're going to say salary cannot be less than Salary cannot be a negative number. Salary cannot be a negative number. Okay. So now we've dealt with two error messages. Okay, now that we've dealt with both of them, the last thing now is else, because there's only two. So if everything is perfect, what happens? Then we use the key called OK, and then under OK, we're going to put what we want to happen, what we want to actually happen. I remember I want to add a new employee. So that's the whole point. You create this function to add a new employee. So what we do is we just write the struct like we've done so many times. So you have the struct and you have the ID because you're taking this field, you're taking everything from this field. So it's going to be the ID, the name, and the salary. So we just follow that. So you have the ID, you have the name, you have the salary. Does it make sense so far? Okay, thank you. So now we've dealt, I've showed you how to deal with error. So it's simple as that. So it's going to return an error if we have any error message that if it's this, if for example, let's say the name is empty, then it's just going to check if name is empty, then sends the error. Then nothing's going to happen after that. Then it's just going to stop. Our code is just going to stop here if you have one error message. Nothing's going to happen. There's no going to be any value that is added to the employee. So this is where it stops. But if we put the salary, then it's just going to be it's going to go step by step. The first step is going to check if name is empty. So in this case, let's say name is not empty. Then it will pass the first case. Then the second case is going to look at the salary. If the salary is less than 0, it's a negative number. Then we're going to have an error message and everything will stop. Then nothing's going to happen. But then if it passes all these cases, first case, the name is not empty. Second case, the salary is greater than 0. Then, only then, something is going to happen. An employee will be added. Now we're going to test it out. So we create a function. We're going to create the main function. And here, we're going to be used the match like we used before. So we're going to enter to call the employee. And remember, we going to create a new employee. So we're going to add all the values according to this parameter. So you're going to be adding the ID, the string, and the salary. So here we're using match, and we're going to on the match. This is the ID that we're going to be adding, and this is the string that we're going to be adding. Remember, we have to use the key to string, and then this is the salary that we're going to be adding. See, so we match employee, new, one, ID, name, string, salary. So this is going to be a bit tricky. Because when it's okay, this is so and so will happen. And if it's an error, then you put the error key inside the bracket, and then so and so will happen. But here we're dealing with success. If it's successful, we're going to print and created employee, and we're going to put the employee name. Okay, so it's going to be emp name. We're going to call the employee name emp name, and we're going to also add salary. And here you're gonna add write emp dot salary. So this is if it's successful, and if it's not successful, we're going to print. Let's remove this. Print line error, and here we're just gonna call the error. So we're going to check this. Here we're creating a new employee object by calling employee new, and then we're calling this function because there's new. If you look at the implementation, you're going to see that there's a new here. So we're just calling it employee new, and then we add all directly. And we add here, you can see that the string is empty, and we add the salary. So if it's successful, there's no error message, then there's going to be a success. It's going to be successful, and it's going to print out the employee name and the employee salary. If not, there's going to be an error message. So let's see how it goes. Cargo run. Something is missing. Something is missing. Yes, there's an error message here. When you're dealing with error, yes.
P12.
Somebody knows something is missing, right?
Yes. P12, isn't it? On the error messages.
Yes. So the first error is I did not return something here. Here I have to return, like when you're using error, you need to return either a string or whatever it is and then error. So let's even check here. Maybe you can see it's written here, enum result something. So it's telling you what is missing. So this is what you're just gonna type out what's going to return. So it's going to be result, and it's either going to return the object if it's successful, or the string. We're not using a static string, we're using a string. So removing that. Yeah. So, and then here we also have to convert it to string, because this will also give us another error message. Here to string, and what else? Let's check what the error says. Okay, so the first thing was the result was missing, and then this match here because it's a floating point. Okay, let's save it. Okay, let me clear everything here, and cargo run. Okay, these are some warning here. We didn't use the ID. We're getting an error message that we created. Name will be empty because you can see here the name here. So let's say, let me write James and save it. Then we can go and run, and you see created employee James salary 20,000. So it works. So I want to try something. I wanna be a little bit naughty and see what's gonna happen if I do that. So save, cargo run. Okay, it works. So everything's okay, even if I do that. Okay. Anyway, so let's say, what if we do that? What's gonna happen? Test this out. If there's like a huge space, then you can see something is not right, right? It created employee, and then there's a space, and then salary 3,000. Now we see that there's something wrong. There's something wrong, something completely wrong. So how do we deal with that? Remember in the previous classes, I showed you how to, some of the methods you can use with string. And one of those methods was trim. Trim removes all the spaces in a string. So let's say I have James, for example, and then there's a space. Trim is just going to remove all this space for me. So what we do is we're gonna go back to name. Let's deal with that. We're going to be dealing with name, and we just call that method, which is trim. So it's simple as just writing trim and then close it. So with Rust and many programming languages, you can use method this way. Even three methods, you're calling it this way. Here, like for the name itself, we use trim, and then we also used the other method called isEmpty. So this is just going to remove all the spaces, and then it's going to check if it's empty. Okay, so now let's go back and put a lot of space. Then we're going to run our code. You can see now name cannot be empty because that function that we use here removes all the space and makes it like that. So yeah, so that works. That works. And now we're going to move on to the next. So far, does anybody has any question? Okay, let's move on. So now we saw we're bringing back something we did before using OK and error message when there's a failure. And the only difference here, we are returning, if it's a success, we're returning an object. And if it's a failure, then we return the string, the error message. So now we're going to move on to the next. We're going to build a simple application that, what this application will do is we have a struct, employee struct. We have the struct of employee manager. So the employee manager will be as this following implementation. It has an implementation of adding a new employee. Adding an employee manager. So adding itself basically. And then the second implementation is add employee. So employer manager can also add employee, and employee manager can also list employees. So that's what we're gonna do. So it does the following. You can create the employee manager, you can add employee, you can also list employee, and then that's basically what we're going to be doing. Let me go back to that. Let me remove all this. And let me Also remove this. We might need this, so let's just remove this. And here, I'm going to, because we're gonna be using hash map. Oh, sorry, we're gonna be using hash map. So we need to import this class. So let me also derive debug. Just get these ones there, and we can start coding. So the first thing that we need is the employee struct. So let's get over there, cut this one, and we're going to have the employee struct. So we have the ID, we have the name, and then we have the salary. Second step, we need to have the manager struct. So we writing struct of the employee manager. No, employee manager struct. It's going to, I call it employee manager. And what else we're gonna have here? So here, because the manager is going to be adding employees, so we're simply going to, that's the only two things that when I get for him. So the manager will have, any managers will have employees. A certain manager will have employees. So we have employees, and this is going to be an hash map with the following keys. So we have a key for the ID, because we have the ID there. And we also have the key for, so the ID is going to be the employee ID, sorry. So you have the ID for the employee manager, my bad, the employee manager. And then we have the key for the employee itself. So because the manager, the employee manager is going to be adding employees. So we have the employee key. So the employee will have all these, the ID, the name, and the salary. And we can also add active and a boolean. Okay, so it's sorted, we have all that. So now, second thing we need is ID. I'll call it next ID of maybe one. So this, we're gonna keep it like that, U32. Okay, now that we have done that, the employee struct, next step is we going to implement the employee manager. We're going to define what exactly is the employee manager going to be doing. So I think okay, so it's going to be, so what do y'all think I should do next? How do I implement? What do I write here? Because I want to have the implementation of the employee manager. So what do I do? What do I type here to implement the employee manager? What's the first thing? No, we're using implementation, remember? We haven't even written the code of implementation. Because this is just going to be the functions under the implementation. So let me put it like that. So here, we're just going to do this implementation, and we're implementing the employee manager. So it's going to be under that we're going to have all of the functions. So the first function is new employee. So new employee manager. So it's just going to be F new, and then we're going to be doing something there. And then there's going to be another function called add employee. So it's just going to be add employee. So remember, we use the snake case in Rust, meaning that we don't use capital letters. It will still work. You can use capital letter and whatever you want to use, but for best practice, you use snake case like that, like lowercase and underscores when you are naming functions. But when you are naming struct, you're using the camel case. That starts with a capital letter like this one here. So this is something you have to bear in mind. And this is just for best practice. It doesn't really do anything to your code. So here's add employee. And then there's the last one called list. It's going to be used to list employees. Okay, so we have three functions. Remember, the employee manager has only as employees. But before we do that, we have to create one employee manager. So we're going to create a function that's going to return the new employee manager that we created. So what do we return here after new? Like what do we actually return when you see new here? Remember, we want to create a new employee manager, meaning that I'm going to have to return something from this function. So what do I return? Remember, to return, you have to do something like that. So what do I return here? Anybody? What do I write here? Hmm? We're creating a new employee, and we're going to be returning the employee itself. Because here, yes, you can do result. You can also do that. We can use result if you want to deal with error messages. Here's Rudolph, you can do that. If you want to go that extra step of dealing with the error message, or here we don't want to be dealing with the error message. We just want to go straight forward and finish the code. So we can deal with that later. But for now, we want to return the employee manager itself. But if we're dealing with result, then it will either be the result will either be employee manager, or it's going to be a string. And the string is going to be the error message. So here we're only returning employee manager, and here we're going to now type out what we're returning, which will be the new employee manager that we've created. And it has these two fields. It has the employee field and the next ID. So what do we put here? Here we put the employee hash map, a new hash map. So it's going to be employees from the struct, like we've specified, and there's going to be an hash map. And we're calling a new hash map. So it's going to be a hash map u. And then the next thing that we're going to be adding is going to be the next ID. And in this case, we're going to play around with this. For now, let's put 1. And we can see if we're going to be able to change it as we add new employee manager. So if the first employee manager that we're going to be adding will be a 1. And then when we call this again, is going to be a 2. The ID is going to be 2. So that's the vision that we're trying to do. And now this, so we have created the employee. And yes, that's it. We have created a new employee manager. You don't have to do anything more. So this function will just return this, meaning that we're going to be, when you want to add value, you're going to be using a hash map and an ID. So now we're moving on to the second part. We want to use, we want to add employee. But now let's go back to what we did yesterday. When we're dealing with, I think it was the third part of the lesson. It's good. No, the third part is up here. Yeah, here. So when we add methods, if you want to add employee, we might need to use mute to change stuff. We might have to do that. And what else we do? So we might have to do it to use mute here. So we're going to be adding employee, we're going to use self because we're dealing with where we are right now, the specific object. And then we're going to add the name and the salary. So, and whether it's active or not. So here we're adding the employee. First thing is going to be mutable because we want to be able to also change stuff. Maybe like, for example, the salary, maybe the employee salary was 60,000. You want to be able to change it to 75,000, so on and so forth. So we can do that by making it mutable. So this object, this employee, specific employee that we use is going to be mutable. And then there's going to be the name because we taking the name from there. And we can also do an ID, but we want the ID to kind of like be generated automatically. So we're not going to put anything here. So it's going to be the name, which is going to be a string. And then we're going to have a salary, which is going to be an F64. F64. Okay. So this is simply going to be creating a new employee. And we add the following properties, the name and the salary. So let's do that. So we're gonna just say, okay, let employee equal employee. Okay, so now I'm asking you, so what do I put here after calling out the employee? Let me see. So cap lock. Okay. So I'll call employee. Let me make sure I call, yeah. I'll call employee struct. So what do I put here? What do I put here? Okay, this one isn't funny. So we just filling up the struct in this manner. So it's going to be the ID, it's going to be the name, it's going to be salary, and whether it's active. So, and you have to bear in mind that in the function we didn't specify whether something is active or whether we have an ID. So this is this is another way of you using a function. But in this case, we're gonna have to generate something automatically. So ID, for example, will be falling onto this ID. This employee manager ID. So we going to just say self and next ID. Second thing is the name. The name is not going to be automatically generated. So the name is just going to simply be the name. So the name is just the name. The name is just the name. But since it's still the same thing, we don't have to type out, we don't have to even type it out. So you can just leave it like that. So name just stays like that. And then salary, same thing with salary. Salary also stays like that because the salary name here, the variable name that is inside the parameter, is the same as this one. So that's similar. So we don't have to make any changes here. And then the last thing is active. In this case, we do that automatically. So when we do that, every employee that we're going to add, every employee that the manager is going to add is going to be actively true, and we have that specific ID so far with the code that we have. So it's just going to have, like for example, if the ID is 1, the ID here is going to be 1 because it's just calling that same ID. So that's what's happening so far. And now we are here. But now remember, we are dealing with hash maps because the employee has an hash map as the following details. I mean, the employee manager, when he has an employee, it has the employee in an hash map of the ID and the employee itself. So that's what we're gonna do. We're going to insert, check self. Let's say, where's the employee? Okay, so we're going to self dot employee, not employees, employees, sorry, because we are calling this one employees dot insert, and we're going to be inserting the following, the ID, which is going to be basically this one, self the next ID, self dot next ID. Why is this thing here? I guess it comes automatically. Self the next ID, and we're also going to get this person here. So we type out employee. I hope it makes sense. So what we're doing here, we calling this in employee manager. So employees, we adding an hash map of the ID and the employee itself whenever we create this. And remember, we want to keep adding the ID. So the ID to change, if you want the ID to change, then it's going to be self. So this might give me an error message, but I'm gonna deal with that. Self the next ID plus 1. Or we can just say self dot x ID equal self dot next ID plus 1. So this is the same thing. So this just take whatever value was, for example, if this was 1, then it's going to be, the new value is going to be 1 plus 1. But we want to do that. And then you have to remember that the self itself is mutable. So this not going to give an error message. But to clean up the code, you can simply write it. The whole thing also is the same as writing this. So this is just going to add 1 every time that you add an employee, and the ID is just going to keep on changing. Let's see what else we need to do. So the last one is we're going to be listing, and let's quickly do that. So we're going to use a for loop that's going to go through all the values in employees, all the employees. So you're going to just say for whatever. It's just a random variable that we just started. That we go through the for loop. So we're going to call it emp. So for emp in calling the object, specific object, employees of that specific object here, and the values. So this is a method that we have called do the following. This is what we're going to be doing. So for employee, in employees, all the values in employees, we want you to do the following. We want you to print everything. We want you to print everything that is there. So to do that, we use this. We don't just put this curly bracket, but we have to put a curly bracket with this inside. This is going to print out the whole object. And here we just put emp. So we call for emp for this object in the specific in here, the employee manager, like look through all the values and then print out each employees that are there. So now when we go to main, in main, we're just going to now create a new manager. And remember, how do we call implementation? What happens when you call an implementation? How do we call it in a main class? So here you see implementation employee, and when you go to the main, it's let's mute employee, and it's that. Or you can call, if you're calling a function, then here we want to create a new employee, then we're going to call a function that is called new under implementation. When we want to create a new employee manager. So we're going to be like, let manager equal, let mute manager, mute manager equal. So now we're calling the employee manager. But since you want to use this new function, because you want to add a new manager, we do this. So directly we just do that. So now, when we do that, we essentially create the employee manager that has the following: a hash map that is currently empty, and a next ID with a default value that is 1. That's what we've done so far. And let's see what will happen next. So we can now use the method that we have. We can have add employee, and we can do that again, add employee. Let's say, I don't like when this happens. So, oh my goodness. So James, for example, so James, toString, and the salary is going to be, I press the insert key, 20,000. My goodness, 20,000. So we have this 20,000, and then we have another one called Alice. This is really, so Alice toString, and then salary is 25,000. Here's 65,000. Okay, so this we adding, and then we have list. So list is just going to print all the objects. So manager.list. What's going on here? Why is not the middle list is fine under struct. Middle list fine for struct implementing current scope. Find the following the method list not fine in struct. Wait a minute. I did not use, oh yes, I did not use the object. So remember, you have to specify that you're using the current object. And yeah, so self employee value. Okay, let's see if you're going to get an error message. Okay, let's see. In the main, yeah, I think I have it. I forgot the comma somewhere. Self. Okay, let's run the code. As you can see, this just add. So we add all this employee, and then the list just lists everything that is inside. I know I say a lot. The let employee inside. Thank you, Rudolph, for your response and your contribution. What do I say here? So yeah, I think I said a lot. There is not a lot of action. But if anybody has a question, Anybody has a question? Yes, Mohammed? Can
Yes,
go on.
Ben. Can you explain the code just in a general way? What the code is saying? Because I get lost.
Oh, you get lost for the okay. So this code, the first thing is it's for employee manager. Let's say you're a manager and you want to be able to add employees. You're adding employees, and you want to have employees that are under you, right? So
Okay.
so so in this code, so now you have two struct. You have the employee struct and you have the employee manager struct. The employee struct has all these values: the ID, the name, salary, active. But the employee manager struct has employees. So it can have 10 employees. One employee manager can have 10 employees, can have 20 employees, can have ever employees he has. And there's also an ID, the ID itself. So here now, we're just implementing what the employee manager does. The struct, what's the behavior of the struct itself? What are we going to add in this struct? So the first thing that it does is this struct. With this struct, you can add a new employee manager like we did here. So here we say let mute manager, and then we created a new manager. We can also have manager 2, manager 3, manager 4, and we use employee manager dot new. So that's what it does in the first step when in the new. So here we're just creating an employee manager. And then the second step now, because we want every manager to have an employee. So every manager can have however employees that they have. And that's why we're using the hash map. Because in hash map, you can use the insert in the hash map and add many values in the hash map. And which we imported using this. So now in add employee, so what values are we going to add? We're adding the name and the salary of each employee. But the ID, we didn't want to keep the code simple, we're using the employee ID, the employee manager's ID. And here, the name, we're using the name itself and the salary, the employee salary, and whether it's active or not. So this function just adds a new employee, and after adding employee, it inserts in the hash map. So we're calling the employee. So we insert here. So we're calling this employees, and we insert the ID and the employee that we created. So we've created this employee here. So we just add this one, the employee, and we're also adding the ID that was created. So by default, the first ID was 1. So it's going to be 1, and then it's going to be added by a 1. So that when you create another employee, then the ID is going to be 2. When you add another employee, the ID is going to be 3. So that's the idea behind this. And then next here, this is just to list. This is a bit confusing because you're going to be using a method called values, something that we haven't gone through. So this just helps us go through the list in the hash map. So for imp, so this is just a random variable that we created called imp. That is the for imp in self-employees.value. Do the following: print the whole object. So that's why we're seeing the whole object employee here, employee 2. So in short, we created a project where an employer can add employees and add details of employees, but the ID is automatically generated. So when they add the first employee, the ID automatically is going to be 1. Second employee, the ID is going to be 2. Third employee, the ID is going to be 3, and so on and so forth. I don't know if it makes sense. It will make better sense if you get your hands dirty and do it yourself and see it step by step. So I'm gonna put the code in lesson 3, and I'm gonna share the link in the group. You can go through it, and when you're done, you also advise you to test to make some changes, maybe change the ID, for example. Instead of the ID starting by 1, you can say the ID is going to start by 2 or 20, for example, and it's going to go by steps of 10. So instead of self-next.id plus 1, then it's going to be plus 10. So it's up to you. Just play around with this code, break this code, and see where it's wrong. And I'm also going to give you a challenge. So this, you're going to have to go back to some of the classes that we did and look for how to search employees by name. So simple as that. Just how to find employees by name and just add that method. This is not a homework. This is just a challenge for you to also help you. So far, today we learned structs, we learned implementation, modules, error handling, and we created a mini employee manager to combine everything. Tomorrow, I'm gonna send you work to do. I want to formulate something that uses everything that we learned so far for you now to test out everything and also to make you ready. So by the time we start coding in Soroban, things will make sense. It will make much more sense to you when we get there. Yeah, I think I went over time. I'm sorry, guys. But this was our last lesson. And look out for tomorrow. I'm going to send you work. So I'm gonna post on Telegram, WhatsApp, and what else? And Discord, South African channel Discord. Okay, thank you for being here today. I really appreciate it. And next week we start smart contract development. I hope y'all excited for that. See you. Bye-bye.